We're continuing our study in the book of Proverbs this evening. And I noticed recently that when you Google something now, there's like an AI Google thing that pops up. And so I wanted to see what it said about Proverbs chapter 27. And this is the Google-generated, AI-generated overview of Proverbs 27. It said this. It says, Proverbs 27 is a chapter in the Bible that contains a series of wise sayings from Solomon that warn against overconfidence and bragging. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of good stewardship and the need for personal accountability. Some key themes in Proverbs 27 include uncertainty of life. We should not assume that things will happen as we expect, and we should approach the future with humility. Good stewardship. A diligent farmer cares for their flock and plans ahead to ensure a prosperous future. Positive friendships. Solomon encourages positive friendships and the wisdom they provide. Speaking truth in love. It is sometimes necessary to speak truth in love, even if it's not what the other person wants to hear. And timing. Timing is important, and a lack of correct timing can turn a good idea into a bad one. I'm just kidding. That's it. There you go. We're done. Go home. Okay. Really interesting because I did that after I had already done the whole study, and I was like, wow, Google AI did their homework. I guess it's easy when you're a computer and you just have all this data at your fingertips, computer tips. All right. So pretty interesting because that's what we're going to be getting into tonight. We got 31 verses to go through tonight, and it's yet another really interesting chapter. I mean, of course, it's God's word, but it's some of the poetry, some of the wording, and some of the concepts here are really interesting tonight. And we're in chapter 27, and chapters 25 through 29 are those chapters that King Hezekiah's men found in Judah and kind of compiled towards the end of the book here. And they assumed that the book was likely finalized sometime before the end of King Hezekiah's reign, around 686 BC or so. Something like that is when this book was done. So super interesting. So let's just jump right into it this evening, continuing in these, I don't want to call them like lost Proverbs of Solomon, but they're the Proverbs of Solomon that were kind of dug up and compiled after his death. All right, so starting with Proverbs 27, verse 1, says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." Now, I think we can all kind of understand, just as human beings in general, that we plan ahead. All the time we plan ahead. Whether it's a big thing or even if it's just a little thing, like, okay, I know that I'm going to, like before I even came here, I know that I was going to hit the gas station before I got to the church today. We like to plan ahead. We always try to plan and prepare, and we try to anticipate things, but the problem is a lot of times we assume that we know what the future holds. We think we know what the future is going to be like. And it might even be a little easy for us to boast about tomorrow. But that's the thing, is we're not meant to be that confident in our assumptions about tomorrow. Sure, you can plan and you can kind of infer and take in data and stuff and make choices, but you shouldn't be super confident in that. They always say you never know if you're going to make it home. You never know if a jet engine's going to fall into the church and blow it up right now. You don't know those things. So we're meant to lean on and trust God. That's the important part. We're meant to rely on God and trust God. We're meant to be humble and not arrogant in these assumptions. We can't be boastful in these assumptions. We're meant to humbly submit to God's will. In fact, look what the book of James has to say about what our futures may bring. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow." One of my favorite verses right here. "For you are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. So for one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, for him it is a sin." You see the difference there? There's a difference between I know exactly what tomorrow's going to bring and I'm going to be arrogant in it versus if the Lord wills, maybe this will happen tomorrow. It's a constant submission to the Lord's will. Just like the parable that Jesus taught in Luke 12 that we read a few weeks ago. He points out the man that stored up all his grain and his goods, and he thinks, I'm good for the next several years, and I'm just going to kick back and I'm going to relax and enjoy my money for all these years. And then God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is demanded of you. You're going to die tonight, and all that you have prepared, who's going to own it now? It was him being foolish. And Jesus says, such is one who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich in relation to God. Again, you gotta submit to God's will. You have to be obedient to God. We like to think that we are in control, but the reality is that we're not. God is in control, so we should be living our lives in humble submission to God and to his will. That's why I wrote that song, that Take Control song, is because God, take control. I don't want to hold the reins, even though I don't really. I think I do, but I don't even want to think that way anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. That's why I wrote that. But it's worth noting that this is saying not to not plan. Planning is still good. We've talked several times about, in the book of Proverbs alone, there's several verses talking about the importance of planning and submitting to God and having godly plans and even inquiring wise counsel when you're making plans. And planning is really important. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about having an overconfidence in your own ability to control things, is what this is getting at. But the reality is that God is in control and not us. Verse 2. There's a couple of them that are only like 2 sentences explanation. Some of them are like 2 pages. Yeah. So verse 2 says, let another praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. We already know that pride is a slippery slope. Pride is something that's really dangerous, and it's a good idea to try to avoid prideful stuff and try to avoid arrogant self-promotion. That's what this is talking about. Because we already have plenty of different ways to self-promote. We have plenty of different ways to say, look at me. We can, just online, you can post and edit pictures and have the filters that make your eyes all googly. And you can record videos of yourself. People all over YouTube are recording videos of the... There's this one guy that Kennedy watches, Bass Fishing Productions, and he's this nerdy kid from somewhere middle America, and all he does is like fish. He gets nets and he fishes in these ponds and he catches fish. That's all he does. But he says, you guys, every other sentence. Like he's talking to you through YouTube. Hey guys, look at guy. Oh my gosh, you guys, look what I caught, you guys. There's so many things for us to do to gain that kind of notoriety. You got to dress the right way. You got to drive the right car. You got to say the right things. There's all sorts of things to do to make yourself look awesome or seem awesome. But we don't need to be praising ourselves like that. And I've spoken many times about the dangers of this kind of thing and pride. That I point out here that phrase one another is super important, especially when you're a believer. The phrase one another is derived from the Greek word alelon, which means one another or each other or mutually or reciprocally. That's what that word means. And that word shows up something like 100 times in the New Testament alone. And about 60 of those times in the New Testament, there's specific commands that emphasize how we should or should not relate to one another. That's a lot. That's super important. But if you turn on your TV right now, you're not going to see a whole lot of one another. You're not going to see that. You're going to see a lot of the opposite. You're going to see live your truth. It's all about you. Do you. Be yourself. Everything is about you. We should not be living lives of self-promotion. That's not what we should be doing. This verse says, let someone else praise you. Let someone else promote you if you're worthy of it. Praise and honor means so much more when they come from an outside source. If I say, man, I look cool, that doesn't matter, but if Jim says I look cool, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself. But this verse says, even from a stranger, it's worth more. Don't say that you're important. Be humble. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus said, it is not this way among you. Rather, whoever wants to become preeminent among you shall be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Be humble. Do not self-promote. Let others do that for you. Verse 3. A stone is heavy and the sand weighty, but the provocation of a fool is heavier than both of them. So this proverb uses something that's practical and obvious to put the main principle into perspective, because a stone is heavy, sand is weighty, is heavy, but provoking a fool is heavier than both the stone and the sand. The implications of it are heavier. A fool is someone that chooses to reject godly wisdom. And provoking somebody that chooses to reject godly wisdom can be a heavy thing. It can be a weighty thing. It can come with repercussions. The fool is capable of a lot of wrath and anger. And they don't necessarily have the same reservations as a person with godly wisdom. So provoking them is not really the best idea. It can have weighty consequences. Verse 4. This is a cool verse here. It says, wrath is fierce and anger is a flood, but who can stand before jealousy? Wrath is a dangerous thing, and being angry is a really dangerous thing. Anger is a dangerous thing. And these emotions, wrath and anger, there's some of the most difficult emotions to control. That's when you lose yourself, is in those types of emotions. This proverb says wrath is fierce. Closer to the Hebrew, it says wrath is cruel, but the Hebrew word there means both cruel and also fierce, which is a great depiction of wrath. And it says anger is like a flood, which is really interesting. What a great way to describe something that's difficult to manage, right? Like something fierce, or like a flood, really hard to manage. A commentary I read says the metaphor depicts anger as a spiritual force that is destructive, irrational, and violent. Beyond that, Solomon points out that the destructive capability of jealousy and the dangers of jealousy are worse than wrath and anger, which is something that we don't really think about, because we think that wrath and anger are these like super high emotions, but we don't tend to focus that much on jealousy. Now, before I explain why, this is not godly jealousy. It's not talking about godly jealousy, because God is not jealous in the same sense that we are. And I've talked about this before when we were in the 12 Minor Prophets. God is jealous in the sense that he does not want us to love or worship false gods, because he doesn't want us to suffer. God's jealousy comes from a place of love. He's jealous for us, not jealous of us. He wants us to have salvation. He is jealous for me. It's different than being jealous of something. But this verse highlights the dark side of jealousy, because wrath and anger have this potential to be really horrible. But notice that it says anger is a flood. If you picture a flood, yes, it's really hard to manage and it's destructive, but the flood subsides fairly quickly. The description of a flood in relation to anger is a really great depiction if you think about it, because it comes on quickly, but it subsides quickly. But jealousy is worse in the sense that jealousy does not subside quickly. It's not like a flood. Jealousy lingers. Jealousy is prolonged. The destructive power of jealousy stays there and lingers and festers. Big difference. Super interesting verse. Verse 5 says, better is open rebuke than love that is concealed. Now, sometimes rebuking somebody or correcting somebody, that's a tough thing to do. But it's an important thing to do. It helps somebody realize that they've done something wrong. It helps people grow and change for the better. Rebuking is a good thing. It's not meant to be an attack. It's not meant to be like criticism. It's calling somebody out and giving them an opportunity for that conviction to help them. Conviction of the Holy Spirit is a very important and really good thing. Conviction from a godly standpoint is a good thing. One commentary I read on this verse says, rebuke kindly, considerately, and powerfully administered cements friendship rather than weakens it. It cements friendship. It builds. It strengthens. And admittedly, sometimes it's hard to accept rebuke too, if you look at the other side of it. Because rebuke can be abrasive, maybe. But I like this. Another commentary I read says that rebuke is a rough medicine. I love that. And none can desire it, but the genuine open-hearted friend may be intended, who tells you your faults freely, but conceals them from all others. But I like that depiction, a rough medicine. I like the way that's worded, because we take pills as grown-ups, but the other night I was trying to get Emily to take some nighttime cough cold medicine, and it took several minutes. But she literally went, and I was like, no. She didn't want it. She's like, I'm not going to finish it. I was like, you have to. You didn't even drink it yet. But medicine's bitter, and it's gross, and it's hard to swallow. But medicine helps. Better is open rebuke than love that is concealed. Now, the love part of that, love when it's concealed, it doesn't really do any good, does it? If you hide that love. If I loved my wife, but I never showed her any of my love, she probably would never become my wife. Love does little good when it's concealed, when it's hidden. The honest love of an open rebuke can be much better than carefully concealed love. Another really interesting verse. This whole chapter's got good ones. Verse 6, again, another one I like. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Now, really interesting wording here, because it kind of ties into the last verse a little bit, and it ties into other Proverbs that we've seen throughout this study. A true friend is not going to hold back correction, even if it hurts, because that true friend wants to see you grow and wants to see you thrive and do better. A mark of a true friend is that they're willing to wound us or hurt us with a loving correction. The correction might not feel good, but it's an expression of love and faithfulness from a friend. It's super important. The wounds of a friend here is referring to that pain or that abrasion, that uncomfortableness, that hurt that's caused by that course correction. Because, again, we don't like it. Until we have godly wisdom and we accept it and we're like, okay, cool, this is teaching me how to be wise. That correction, a lot of times it's like, man, you don't like that. And admittedly, sometimes we need that from our friends. We need a good smack upside the head when we're not doing the right thing, figuratively. And we've talked about disciplining our kids in this study before, and how about some discipline from our friends that love us? If a parent can discipline their child to help them learn and grow, your friend should be able to discipline you to help you learn and grow. Once again, I'm not saying that all discipline needs to be physical to get a point across. Stern words or strong words work just as well. As in most cases, and sometimes these words from a friend can be painful. I don't know why I keep looking at Jim like he's going to tell me something painful. But again, coming from a place of love, they're super beneficial. Now the other part of that verse, it says, deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Just as much as a friend can wound, an enemy can pretend to be friendly. Not all kisses are the greetings of your buddy. They may come from an enemy and be deceitful. And of course, the first thing that we think of, I'm sure you guys thought of it as soon as we read it, is Judas. Scripture says, the one who was betraying him had given them a signal saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one, and arrest him and lead him away under guard. And after coming, Jesus immediately went to Jesus and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And then they laid hands on him and arrested him. I'm sure that's one of the first things you guys thought of. It's a perfect example of a deceitful kiss from an enemy masquerading as a friend. He even addressed him, Rabbi, teacher, friend, and then betrayed him. Verse 7. I keep saying it's another super interesting verse. I'm going to just assume that it is. Proverbs 27:7. A satisfied person despises honey, but to a hungry person, any bitter thing is sweet. When someone's satisfied, when we're satisfied with what we've got, we tend to take things for granted. The example that this verse gives is honey with the first part. Honey is sweet, and it's kind of considered like a delicacy in the area back then. And the thing is, when things are going well, when things are going great, it's not valued as much. And a lot of people agree that this proverb can be expanded to possessions and experiences and a lot of different things and whatever else it may be, but it's using honey to put it into perspective for us. If you think about money, let's say you're completely broke. Payday is a week away, and you got $20. That $20 is worth a lot, and it's valuable, and you're going to stretch it out, and I'm just going to get a regular cheeseburger from McDonald's today so I could stretch it out. But if you're sitting on a bunch of money, $20 doesn't matter as much. You can go to the store and go, you give me a couple lottery tickets and give me some candy bars. I'm going to get a soda too. You don't treat that $20 the same way because you have it. That's the same thing in this proverb. Honey is valued. Honey is a commodity. It's a delicacy until you have a surplus. Then honey's whatever. I got plenty of honey. And it works when you flip that coin too to the other side. To a hungry person, any bitter thing is sweet. When you're in need, your standards are a lot lower. When you're hungry, even bitter things taste better. I'll take what I can get. Our reactions, a lot of times it depends on our circumstances, how we react to things. Somebody that has a lot, they begin to fail to see the value in things. They don't see stuff the same way. And somebody who has only a little sees value completely differently. And you can apply this to many different things in life, not just food and not just money. Think about things from a spiritual standpoint too. You can apply it. One commentary I read on this verse says, the best way of combating worldliness is by satisfying the heart with something better. The full soul loathes even the honeycomb. When the prodigal gets the fatted calf, he has no further hankering after the husks which the swine eat. Fill your heart with God and his sacred truth, and the things of the world will lose their charm. When you're filled with God, you don't want the worldly stuff. Those who are awakened spiritually are hungry for spiritual food. What a cool verse. Verse 8, like a bird that wanders from its nest, so is a person who wanders from his home. Now this verse, just on face value, it just makes sense. From a practical standpoint, it just makes sense. Picture a mother bird wandering away from her nest. Now she can't look after her eggs or her baby birds. Or a person that leaves their home, they can't look after their family, they can't take care of their home. But you can also see the deeper meaning of this verse too, because a bird wandering away from a place of safety and security, the nest, the home where it belongs, you can see that. And there's actually a few different ways to look at this. Basically, leaving our home is like a bird leaving its nest, but you can also look at it in more creative ways if you think about it. One example that I saw when I was doing my study is it talked about people that church hop, picturing a home church. They go from church to church and they don't have a home church. So it prevents them from investing into ministry. It prevents them from really getting a chance to serve others. It prevents them from a consistent study because now they're jumping around different sermon topics and different ways of the word being presented. There's a lot of reasons to find a church home and stick with it. But you can also look at it from a standpoint of home being where God has you, where God is using you, where God's equipping you. Where has God placed you? If God's equipped you in certain ways and God brought you to a place where he can use you, if you abandon that place, you're like a bird leaving the nest. And all of these make sense and all of them are relevant. Verse 9, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and a person's advice is sweet to his friend. So in the Bible, oils and perfumes are used for specific things. Closer to the Hebrew, this actually says oil and incense. Think about it this way. We like the smell of flowers. I like a good rose. A rose smells really nice. We like the smell of good food. I love the smell of food. Every time you drive past In-N-Out, you know you take a couple extra smells. You know that you're buying In-N-Out because it smells good. Smells can make us happy. A person's advice is sweet to his friend. Closer to the Hebrew here, it says the sweetness of a friend is counsel to the soul. I like that. And we're happy when our friends help us. And we're happy when they give us good advice. It's sweet. Counsel from a friend is sweet and it can make us happy. It's just a natural thing. It's just as natural for oil and perfume or incense to bring us joy with its good smells. Counsel from a friend is sweet and can make us as happy as In-N-Out smell. Do you guys like In-N-Out smell? Okay, good. Because I do too. You don't like it? You don't like it? You don't like In-N-Out? I mean, it's not like amazing, but it's pretty close. Get out. My God. I don't think I've met anybody from California that says they don't like In-N-Out. I get In-N-Out like 4 times a week. It's not my choice, but I do. I need to give you menu items to try. Anyway, sorry. Proverbs 27:10. Do not abandon your friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house on the day of your disaster. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother far away. Now, there's several verses today that are talking about friendship, and friendship's a really important thing. Investing in others is an important thing, and again, we've talked about one another and how important that is. This proverb shows that friendships actually stand the test of time. And it tells us that we should invest in those friendships and we shouldn't abandon those friendships. And it compares close friendships to brotherhood. But it also says, don't abandon your friend or your father's friend, which is interesting. It's interesting that it adds your father's friend. But look at it this way. Your father's friend used to help your father, so maybe your father's friend will help you too. This verse says, do not go to your brother's house on the day of your disaster. And at first you might wonder, why? Why not? That's my brother. But sometimes, believe it or not, our actual brother might not be the best one to help us on the day of our disaster, especially if your brother's far away. And you can look at it as better is a friend that's nearby than a brother that's far away. And I mean, this really makes sense to me because my brother lives in Illinois. If I'm going through a disaster, am I going to fully rely on my brother in Illinois? Or am I going to go to Dennis or Victor or Jim? It makes much more sense to turn to my close friends than to my actual brother who's 1,900 miles away. Very simple proverb. Verse 11. Be wise, my son, and make my heart glad, so that I may reply to one who taunts me. Now, we've seen several proverbs written from Solomon to his son. It's another one. But basically, Solomon, once again, is asking his son to be wise. He's saying, be wise, my son. And by doing that, it's going to make Solomon's heart glad. Be wise, my son, and make my heart glad. And not only that, if his son is wise, then he can be confident in his son. And he can not only be happy, but he can be confident there. Because if his son rejected wisdom, that would make his son a fool. And it would bring shame to Solomon. We've already read Proverbs that say that. Proverbs 10 says, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. Proverbs 17 says, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who gave birth to him. And Proverbs 19 says, a foolish son is a destruction to his father. So if Solomon's son is wise, of course it's going to make his heart glad, but it also says that he may reply to one who taunts me. If Solomon's son chooses godly wisdom, Solomon doesn't have to worry about what anybody's got to say because his son has godly wisdom. You can taunt me all you want. Verse 12. A prudent person sees evil and hides himself, but the naive proceed and pay the penalty. Now, the prudent person or the sensible person sees evil and hides himself. And that just makes sense, again. They see danger and they know how to react to it. And actually, if you remember just a few weeks ago, about a month and a half ago or so, this proverb is repeated word for word from Proverbs chapter 22. And we've read many verses talking about avoiding evil and avoiding temptation, and Proverbs puts an interesting perspective on it. And this says those that are prudent or those that are sensible or clever, they hide themselves from evil. That's a great way to look at it, and it's an important reaction. If I need to avoid evil stuff, might as well hide from it. And we had a conversation afterwards about not cowering from it, but more like having God as a shield and hiding from it in the sense of being behind a godly shield. Now, as for the naive person, the person that doesn't really know any better, they're unable to perceive the dangers of evil to respond correctly. They don't know. So they wind up paying the penalty. A simple person or a naive person, they haven't learned how to be wise. They haven't learned how to react to things. So they don't keep an eye out for those evil things the way a wise person would. Verse 13, another proverb that's quoted almost word for word, says, take his garment when he becomes a guarantor for a stranger, and for a foreign woman seize a pledge from him. Now, like I said, it's almost word for word, because in chapter 20, it says foreigners This says foreign woman. So this one specifies foreign woman, whereas the other one says foreigners. But in actuality, it's still saying the same thing, because that second part in chapter 20, closer to the Hebrew, it's speaking of a wayward woman. So both of them are actually saying the same thing. It's talking about an Old Testament principle going all the way back to the book of Exodus that says that an Israelite could take somebody's outer garment as collateral or some sort of a guarantee for a loan as long as they returned it each evening. Solomon's basically saying in this proverb that if you loan to somebody who's already foolishly agreed to be a guarantor for a stranger, you better make sure that you get the deposit. You better make sure you get some collateral. If they're already foolish enough to be a guarantor for a stranger, they're a credit risk. They've got a bad credit score, so make sure you get that deposit first. Make sure you get some collateral for it if he's willing to be a guarantor for a stranger. Verse 14, one who blesses his friend with a loud voice early in the morning, it would be considered a curse to him. Now, there's a little bit of humor in this verse, and there's two different ways to look at it. So the main way that I found is that this verse is talking about an over-the-top greeting. And a lot of times over-the-top greetings are meant to flatter. And if you're flattering somebody, it's hinting at manipulation through that flattery. There's something off about getting a greeting like this. Another commentary I read says, his unnatural voice and timing betrays him as a hypocrite, and no good will come of it. They say someone who praises you like this has either deceived you already or they're about to. And notice the second part of that verse. It says it will be considered a curse to him. Normally, a friendly greeting is nice. It's nice to greet somebody. But this is not talking about just a normal friendly greeting. This is an over-the-top greeting meant to manipulate somebody using flattery. And that's why this says it will be considered a curse. There's some sort of a motive behind this flattery, this extravagant greeting like this. And the motive is not just being friendly to somebody. It's an over-the-top greeting meant to manipulate somebody. Now, of course, you can look at this proverb really simply and just say that a loud greeting early in the morning is going to annoy a lot of people. If I run over to Jim's house at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm going, Jim, good morning, sunshine. Yeah, it's going to make his neighbors get mad. Our actions have effects on other people, not just Jim, but his neighbors. Now they're going to be mad at me and they're going to be mad at Jim. But again, as we've seen before, both of these can be true. Both of these make sense for this proverb. Verses 15 and 16. A constant dripping on a day of steady rain and a contentious woman are alike. He who would restrain her restrains the wind and grasps oil with his right hand. Really interesting wording here. And we've talked a few times about the contentious woman and read a couple of these verses. But you can imagine a leaky roof. When it's raining, having a leaky roof and having that constant dripping, first of all, it's annoying. That's just an annoying thing, and it starts to drive you nuts. But also, that tells you that there's a problem. There's a problem there, and that problem can lead to more problems, because a leaky roof, there's an issue with the outside of the home somewhere because water's getting in. So water's starting to get into the ceiling, and then it's starting to do damage to the inner parts of the ceiling. And then on top of that, the drips are going to drip on the carpet and have a big water stain on the carpet. It's going to drip on your nice lazy boy and mess that up. One problem starts to balloon into other problems. So you can see how that applies here. But the annoyance of that dripping and the issues that come with it, they're like a contentious woman. In verse 16, verse 16 there, it says, he who would restrain her. That's a really interesting thing there too, because the Hebrew word there for restrain, it means to hide, to reserve. But from a figurative stance of that word, the word means to deny. It's speaking of kind of holding her back, essentially. If she's already a contentious woman, and she's already really difficult to deal with, you can imagine that adding that kind of pulling her back or denying her is going to be even worse. A contentious woman is difficult to deal with. And Proverbs 21 says it's better to live on the corner of a roof than to share a house with a contentious wife. And then later on it says it's better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and irritating woman. So you can imagine trying to restrain this type of woman would not be very easy. Verse 16 says that if the man can do that, he would be able to restrain the wind itself and grasp oil with his right hand. It's as difficult as grabbing the wind or holding oil is restraining that contentious woman. So maybe instead of attempting to deny that woman or restraining that difficult woman, maybe the man could respond with love. Instead of being combative, if you know that there's issues there, maybe he can respond with love. Paul spells it out in Ephesians. He says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by washing water with the word, and he might present himself to the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands also ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are parts of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. If you respond that way to the contentious woman, I bet it's a lot easier to work with her than it is to grasp the wind and hold on to oil. A wise and godly husband loves her as Jesus loves his church. And he leaves the changing up to God. It's not up to him. Again, more cool verses. Here's one that Victor likes here. Proverbs 27, verse 17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. This proverb is a great proverb that gets repeated a lot in small groups, a lot in men's groups and women's groups, especially men's groups, because men are tough. Iron sharpens iron. Yeah, high five, let's throw axes. Definitely a great proverb for any believer, and to be honest, the principle is very simple, and it's very practical, and it's real. It's a real thing, because a piece of iron can actually sharpen another piece of iron in real life. Likewise, a person can be used to sharpen another person. Sharpen in the sense of growing and improving and strengthening and developing and encouraging. Iron can sharpen another piece of iron through sometimes friction and sparks and heat. Likewise, a person that's sharpening another person might cause a little bit of friction and a little bit of sparks, but essentially you're building and you're strengthening and you're encouraging and you're growing. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Another cool verse. Verse 18. One who tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and one who cares for his master will be honored. Cool poetry, cool wording, cool proverb, very simple premise. Basically, the worker earns the reward that he works for. A good worker should be worthy of his reward. Pretty plain and simple. If somebody plants a fig tree and takes care of it and raises it until it bears fruit, that person should be able to eat the fruit that it bears. If somebody works really hard for something, it's not right to not give them some sort of a reward. For instance, if I tell my kids, okay, we're going to spend the whole day cleaning the house, and if it's spotless, then we can go to the store and we can buy a stuffy. And if the house gets clean, we should go get that stuffy. It wouldn't be right for them to work hard on the house and then not get the stuffy. The fig tree is relevant here because, not just because they were more valuable than other trees that were in the area at the time, but because the fig tree actually needed more attention than other plants in order to thrive and grow properly. It shows the extra work that goes into it, the diligence required to take care of that plant. In the same way that taking the care of the fig tree brings with it the reward of fruit, the good worker earns honor as a reward for his hard work. It's not right to keep the honor from the servant that's faithfully cared for his master and worked for his master. One who cares for his master will be honored. A good farmer deserves his harvest, and a good servant deserves a reward and honor. Verse 19. This one's got a short description. Another poetic proverb says, as in water a face reflects the face, so the heart of a person reflects the person. Very simple principle here. Water can reflect like a mirror in the same way a person's heart reflects who that person is. As water reflects a person's face, the heart reflects the person, who the person is. Verse 20. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, nor are the eyes of a person ever satisfied. So Sheol means the underworld. It's synonymous with dying and kind of hell. And Abaddon means destruction. This is understood to say hell and destruction are never satisfied. They're never full. You can never stop. You can never fill them, satisfy them. They devour anything and anybody that's put into them. And Solomon likens that to the eyes of a person never being satisfied. Our longing to look on things that we desire is never satisfied. Whether it's lusting after somebody from the opposite sex, you got billboards, you got magazines, you got TV and movies and websites or whatever, or looking at other things that we like and maybe we want, like nice cars, nice clothes, even delicious food, even vacation spots. Whatever it is, it's endless. We're constantly looking for those things, and we like looking at them. We can only combat that with God. We can only be satisfied if we accept what God gives us and we're truly content with what God gives us. Paul wrote this in Philippians. He said, "Not that I speak from need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with little, but I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." The answer is having that need channeled and satisfied in God in whatever he provides for us. Jesus said, "Whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty, but the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to eternal life." Verse 21. "The crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, and each is tested by the praise accorded him." So there's an appropriate place for gold and silver to be refined. We talk about the heat that burns away impurities, and then you get pure silver and pure gold. And it doesn't just happen anywhere. It happens in a refining pot. There's a specific place for it. And this verse is comparing the refining of those precious metals to the testing of a person through praising them. The idea is that a person's reaction to praise reveals kind of their nature and their how pure they are, just as fire reveals purity or impurity in precious metals. Someone who responds to compliments and praise with arrogance or egotism or gets all puffed up and prideful, they might have some sort of a character flaw. But somebody who accepts praise with humility might not. They might not have that same pride. A person might discover their value. They might discover their value more, or they value more of what others say to them than they actually think of themselves. One commentary I read says, "He who is praised is not only much approved, but much proved." So you can test a person's attitudes by doing this. And some people respond with pride when they're praised, and some people respond with humility. Each is tested by the praise accorded him. Verse 22 says, "Though you pound the fool in a mortar with a pestle along with crushed grain, his foolishness will not leave him." Another interesting presentation there, poetic verse here. I mean, they're all poetic in here, but it's using these visuals to get the point across. Despite grinding the fool into a fine powder, he's still foolish. In other words, fools don't seem to learn because they already think they're right. They go against godly wisdom because they don't think they need it. Pretty plain and simple. And then we close tonight by looking at verses 23 to 27 all in one shot. It's all one group here. Really cool verses. I'm glad that we close on this because I like this. It says, "Know well the condition of your flocks, and pay attention to your herds. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure all generations. When the grass disappears, the new growth is seen, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in. The lambs will be for your clothing, and the goats will bring the price of a field. And there will be enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and sustenance for your attendants." So first of all, once again, Solomon is using visual language. He's using visuals here to get his point across here. He's using agricultural stuff in these verses. He's getting his readers to visualize what he's talking about. And they would get it. Everything that he's mentioning, they would get it because they lived in a very agricultural area. But by doing that, he's able to make a point. He's talking about flocks and herds and riches and crowns and grass and herbs and mountains and lambs and clothing and fields and goat's milk and food and even a household and attendants. You're starting to picture this whole kind of area and this whole property and this place. Agricultural stuff, agriculture in general is a lot of hard work, and it requires diligent workers. Solomon wrote this with images from agriculture, but the principle applies throughout our entire lives. It's all over the place. You can put this into every different facet of your life. We should work hard to know the state of whatever God has given us to manage. Whatever God has given us management over, we should be working hard to know the state of it. If you don't know the condition of something, you can't effectively manage it or lead it, take control of it. You can't. Think about anything you have to manage in this life. Let's just say your yard. Picture your yard. You need to know if it's overgrown. Are the weeds overgrowing? Do you need to pull the weeds? Is anything growing up on your pathways up to your house? Are your bushes starting to get overgrown? Is grass growing through the little cracks on the driveway? All of that needs to be taken into account when you're determining what you need to do to get done. You have to analyze that. For instance, at the paper mill I work at, every morning at the mill we have a meeting that starts at 6:40 a.m. And we talk about the state of the entire mill and what needs to get done that day. Every morning, while that meeting's going on, I run a full inventory and I schedule a plan for the entire day of what stuff we need to move out of the warehouse and what's going to be manufactured, and I plan it. Because if you don't know the condition of something, you cannot effectively manage it or lead it. Recently, Emily's been sick. She's been complaining about her tummy for a while now, and she's had this fever off and on for like a week. But in order for us to determine whether or not she needs to go to the doctor or go to the ER, I need to know how she feels. I need to know how she's doing. How's she eating? How high is her fever? How many days has she had a fever? Does she have dark circles under her eyes? All of that needs to be taken into account. Because if I don't know the condition of something, I can't effectively manage it or lead it. Handle what you're responsible for and handle it well. Not to mention that diligent leadership and management are important because this proverb shows that the future is uncertain. And that's how we started this whole chapter off. The future is uncertain. Riches are not forever. A crown does not endure to all generations. Which is why it's so important for us to focus on what God has given us right now. What we're responsible for. Whether God's given us the responsibility for the entire Kraft Heinz company, which is the third largest food and beverage company in North America and the fifth largest food and beverage company in the world. Whether you got that much responsibility, or maybe you're just responsible for driving a forklift in a warehouse and you got a small household with maybe you and your wife and one kid, and you got to manage that household. Regardless, if we take good care of what God has given us right now, it's going to take care of us in the future. That's what's cool about this. It says, when the grass disappears, the new growth is seen. And the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, and the lambs will be for your clothing. And the goats will bring the price of a field. And there's going to be enough goat's milk for your food and for the food of your household and sustenance for your attendants. If we take good care of what God has given us right now, it might provide for our future. Properly manage what you have with godly wisdom and with godly patience. In these last few verses, Solomon is describing a farm. And he warns the farmer to be responsible and diligent in what he's doing. Because if the farmer doesn't work, he's going to lose his land, he's going to lose his animals, he's going to lose everything. But if the farmer works hard, his family's going to be content. They're going to be provided for. The sheep and the goats are going to grow and thrive. The farmer's going to make a profit from selling his animals. The farmer's going to get clothes and milk from his animals. The farmer has an opportunity to receive some income and make some money and be able to live well. And his family's going to be able to live well. And even his attendants, it says, are going to be provided for. They're going to have sustenance. All because the farmer was responsible with what God gave him. Manage well what God has given you and properly manage what you have. And with that, That's Proverbs chapter 27. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for speaking through Solomon, God, and giving him your wisdom and giving him the foresight to write this stuff down and to log it, God, and to save it so that we can read it all these years later and make sense of it, God, and grow closer to you and see godly wisdom in these principles that you've taught. God, I just want to thank you for this church and the opportunity to come here and just study your word together as a collective and fellowship in your name, God, and grow closer to you and develop relationships, God, with your children. We're so thankful that you're a real, tangible God and that you're right here in this room, God. Even when there's only a handful of us, God, you're still moving just as powerfully as you always have. You're absolutely amazing, and you deserve our worship and our praise. And God, I pray that if there's any sort of wind that's whistling through the cracks of our faith, God, I pray that you strengthen our faith and seal those cracks, God. Help us to grow closer to you and be more diligent in our walks with you. And in everything that you've entrusted to us individually, God, I pray that we manage those things and manage them well, and that we rely on you and trust in your will, that your will be done, and that that's good enough. That we can plan, but we need to be praying first. And we need to trust you in all things, God. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. You're absolutely amazing. We love you and we trust you, God. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.